The medial geniculate nucleus. The medial geniculate nucleus is also called as the medial geniculate body, and it is the part of auditory system. But the lateral geniculate body is the part of visual system, whereas the medial geniculate body or the nucleus is the part of the auditory system, which means the medial geniculate body receives ascending fibers from the inferior colliculus of the brain via inferior brachium or brachium of the inferior colliculus to the medial geniculate body. After receiving the auditory inputs by means of inferior colliculus, the medial geniculate nucleus projects its fibers via retrolenticular part of the internal capsule and to the auditory radiation to the primary auditory cortex of the temporal lobe. So, what is the primary auditory cortex of the temporal lobe? It is area 41 and 42. Whatever may be the information carried to the inferior colliculus in terms of the auditory signals, so these inputs in turn sends axons to the medial geniculate nucleus of the thalamus, which is also called as medial geniculate body. So, after receiving the information, that is auditory information, by the medial geniculate body, now it has to process the information, it has to check how much information need to be sent to the primary auditory cortex. So, that is the reason the relay of the auditory impulses takes place in the medial geniculate body, where it checks the quality and how much impulses need to be sent to the primary auditory cortex. So, the final step in this entire auditory pathway is the ascending auditory fibers or the ascending auditory pathway, which consists of the axons that originate in the medial geniculate nucleus and pass through the internal capsule finally to reach the primary auditory cortex of the temporal lobe, which is the Brodmann area 41 and 42, right, which are situated on the dorsal surface of the posterior temporal gyrus and therefore are largely hidden within the lateral fissure. And the region of the temporal lobe surrounding the primary cortex is known as auditory association cortex. This auditory association cortex is also called as Wernicke's area, represented by the Brodmann area 22. Here, the auditory information is interpreted and given a contextual significance. So, the Wernicke area is important in processing language by the brain. So, this is the function of the medial geniculate body in relaying auditory information to the primary auditory cortex of the brain. By this, we completed important anatomical points regarding the medial geniculate body.